Yeah, you used to have one.
Huggins, you guys ready?
We are, yes, sir.
Okay. All right, we'll call the first item for the committee of the whole meeting to order. First item being 1A, the budget workshop. Ms. Huggins, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly, and thank you, trustees, for being here today for our third budget workshop. I want to really commend staff on their work, their collaborative work, particularly the chiefs around the table, Mr. Brody, Ms. Simmons, Mr. Brigman, Ms. Denny, and Mr. Prentice for their work over the last several weeks preparing for the FY25 budget. It's been quite a time together, and we're excited to be back today to present some more details to you about the planning process, where we think we are as far as teacher raises, weighted student funding, classified employee raises, and talk to you about a 3-year forecast as well today. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Prentice, and again, thank him for his impeccable leadership in just 2 short weeks here on the job. Mr. Prentice.
All right, thank you. And Maggie, are you at a point where you can key up the presentation, or I don't want to? Sorry, I know you're dealing with a number of things back there.
Nope.
Thank you. There we go. All right, so start this out giving an update on revenues. You've seen this template before, looking at the fiscal 2024 board approved budget compared to 2024 year-end projected revenues, which ties to the February 29th financial statements report that was provided at Audit and Finance Committee that we'll share later this evening during the committee of the whole. But our projected year-end revenues in the GOF are $737.2 million, which is $34.9 million over the base budget that was approved by the board. The primary source of that variance is in local sources. 33.3 million of it is derived from that. And I will share some more information later in this presentation about where some of those increases are coming from. We've also seen a small variance from the state and federal sources and transfers to make up that total, which is about 4.97% over budget. If you flip to slide 3, there we go. Comparing this to fiscal 24 projected year end, which ties to what's on the last slide, to our fiscal 2025 base budget estimate. We're looking at $29.7 million in additional local revenues, and then $9.3 million in additional state revenues. Those are the 2 major categories that we're seeing substantial increases in, for a total of additional $34.1 million in the fiscal 2025 base budget over this fiscal year's projected year end. And if you'll go to the next slide, to slide 4, oops, back one more. There we go. So this just looks at the base budget for this year as approved by the board compared to next year's projected revenues. So all in, we're looking at $67.6 million in additional revenue. Majority of that is coming from local sources, as that's where we saw the most substantial growth this year and where we're projecting additional growth next year. But all in from base budget to base budget, 9.6% overall increase. And then go ahead and go to the next one. So just a overview in terms of the categorical percentages of where the revenue comes from. Largest, of course, at 64%, 64.7% coming from local property taxes and other local sources, 33.1% coming from the state, and just a small amount, 2.1% coming from transfers. Those are the only sources that register with a percentage of the budget on the pie chart there. Go ahead and go to the next one. So again, we're projecting that $67.6 million in revenue growth over this fiscal year's budget. We're also adding a proposed use of $20 million in ESSER sustainability funds, and I'll show that in a future slide in terms of how we're breaking that down. But that would grow our overall revenue capacity to $87.6 million. I do caution at this point in the process, while we've gotten these numbers significantly refined, and we're still going through some additional refinement as we look to the end of this fiscal year. In particular, we're waiting on the TIF assessments from the county auditors, or excuse me, from the county treasurer's office, as well as some additional growth updates to settle on our final numbers. And then at the state level, the numbers that you see in there from the House version of the budget, we understand that the Senate version of the budget has some changes, particularly a reduction in the state aided classrooms component, but also a component of potentially covering the cost of retirement increase, which may offset that reduction on the other side. So we're leaving those numbers where they are right now, but once we get some more information at the state level, we'll make those adjustments. But I wouldn't imagine that it would be material to the overall budget picture, plus or minus $1 million and in total sum, once we see which version of the scenarios they're going to move forward with. So if you go to the next slide. So of the $34 million in growth over this fiscal year's projected year end, I wanted to break down where those sources are coming from. In particular, property transfers that have happened in the county over the last year. There's a name for those, ATIs, or assessable transfers of interest. There were over 7,500 property transfers that occurred in Charleston County in the last year. And those properties, when they sold at a higher value than what they were currently on the tax roll at, resulted in an additional $9.3 million in revenue to the GOF based on our current millage levy. Additionally, new construction assessments, so new construction that was placed in service or issued a certificate of occupancy in the county, accounts for $8.7 million in that revenue. And then we also included in our assumptions a 3 mil swap from the debt fund that we've referenced previously, which would reduce the debt millage levy by 3 mils and transfer that millage over to the GOF, keeping our total millage levy the same, but that would increase revenue to the GOF by $10 million. And we only have that capacity due to the ability to refinance existing debt outstanding at a lower interest rate and decrease our overall cost of borrowing over the next several years, which reduces the need for that millage, especially as our tax base has grown in the same time. You go to the next slide. So just kind of a summary here to round out some of the revenues. I wanted to share the long range projection for what we're looking to do with the ESSER sustainability funds that were set aside. I want to really note that those funds are not part of our fund balance calculation. They've been sitting in a separate restricted category across all of the GOF dollars that the board has allocated over the years. A lot of it's been accrued through savings in the budget. But the $37.8 million is intended to offset the implementation of the WSF. And so what we're looking to do, if you look at the chart down there, the WSF is budgeted $32.8 million for fiscal year 2025. And we're proposing to use $20 million of those ESSER sustainability funds to require only a net transfer from the GOF of $12.8 million to implement it. And then in fiscal 26, when we see reassessment come into effect, we're decreasing that appropriation of ESSER sustainability funds down to $10 million. And then in fiscal 27 down to $7.8 million. So the goal being that over the next 3 years, the GOF can pick up the implementation of the WSF without requiring a tax increase to allow us to make that a sustainable implementation. And I'll share at the latter end of this presentation, long range forecast through fiscal year 2028 that reflects all of that information added together to show how we're able to balance the budget in each of those years using a mixture of revenue growth, fund balance above the policy, and ESSER sustainability funds to be able to make this whole picture function. So you go to the next slide. There we go. So what we're going to show you this evening is a balanced budget It includes a number of different components from the overall philosophy that we've talked about over the last month or so. And all scenarios that are selected in this balanced budget cost approximately $110 million. So we're balancing with a preliminary use of non-ESSER sustainability fund balance. So fund balance that we've accrued over the board approved policy, which is over the state required policy, to be able to present a no tax increase base scenario. And then we've also provided some additional scenarios that the board may wish to consider, particularly with respect to compensation, and associated those dollars with it as well, and some kind of round out scenarios at the end. You go on the next slide. So a lot of these charts you've seen before. This is the required increases, totals 22.7 million. This is all included in the base budget. As I mentioned, there is a possibility that we see some revenue come in from the state with the health insurance increases being covered on the Senate version of the budget, but we're not exactly sure what that's going to look like yet. Now, let's see, we lost the presentation, so I'll give a second there for you to get that back up. There we go. So all of those things are included. If you go on to the next slide. So the teacher salary increase of $5,000 plus fringe totaling $24.1 million. That's the scenario that's included in the base budget for the purposes of balancing. So that's included in this base budget that you'll see at the end of the presentation as well. Go ahead and move to the next slide. And then for non-teacher salary increase considerations, we included in the base a 99% of market, which equates to 5% COLA plus fringe, and then non-teacher step, as well as increasing the step from step 31, which was in the budget this year for non-teachers, to step 33 and the associated fringe, as well as the school-based positions and the TA position upgrades that HR is reviewing at this point in time. So all of that totals 19.6 million. And again, all of that's included in the base proposal as well. Going to the next. All of the school support considerations that you've seen previously, all of those are included. So won't get into those with any particular detail, but those all remain the same. Going to the next slide. All of the human resources considerations that you've seen previously, the substitute increases, there's already an allocation for that this year based on our actual experience. That trues that up with an additional $1.5 million for teachers and teachers assistants, the leadership pipeline, and then the alternative certification pathways program and HR, all for a total of 3.3 million. Go on to the next slide. In financial services, some structural adjustments that the board will see later, as well as the ESSER closeout. Y'all know the ESSER program funding ends September 30th. And so the staff that is essentially overseeing that closeout, this covers a portion of their salaries through the end of the fiscal year, so that we can effectively close out the ESSER program and make sure that we have those folks on board to see it to the end, since they're not just going to immediately be done on September 30th. Go to the next slide. The CERTA CD Head Start considerations, all the same from previous for $6.2 million. That's all in the base. Going to the next. And then learning services considerations totaling $2.8 million. These are some new additions that we've detailed. We presented these at Audit and Finance the prior week. So I don't know if there's any explanation that we want to go into at this level. Turn it over to Ms. Huggins or Ms. Simmons potentially to detail those.
Thank you, Mr. Prentice. My expansions equal 2.8. They are a fraction of what we requested. But nevertheless, student support services and wraparound services, including mental health, social workers, that's been a big part of our recovery effort post-pandemic. And so we do not want to see the services that students have been able to receive fall through the wayside. So this has been a big ask for us, and we got it down to 750. We also talked at Audit and Finance about a welcome center for our multilingual learner population, and the fact that when families and scholars enter our country, we want to provide that type of care, that they have an orientation, they have someone in particular studying their transcripts, and they have the benefit of knowing exactly where they should be housed when they enter our system. We always have a level of expansions for special education in the Department of Exceptional Children, as well as the support we've been providing for the last 3-4 years in terms of virtual programming. The virtual school was popular during the pandemic, but there have been families who've decided that's the best route for their entire family. And we want to be able to provide that versus outsourcing. And so this is the complement or package from Learning Services for this fiscal year.
Thank you for that, Ms. Simmons. Maggie, we'll go on to the next slide and briefly overview the weighted student funding investment. Did you have a question, Ms. Roberson?
Yes, ma'am. Mr. Prentice, maybe this is for Ms. Simmons. In order for me to keep up with everything, I had the audit and finance presentation side by side with today's. And are we going to talk about this later? There's something different with this deck.
You can go ahead and ask. We can answer the interventionist,
Literacy coaches.
the literacy interventionist.
Climate coaches.
Climate coaches would be a part of student support services wraparound services. That's packaged there, but we didn't denote everything that wraparound services will account for. So Lisa Allison prepared, based on what we were stepping out of ESSER, she prepared a request, a proposal. We were not able to satisfy the entirety of it. So she's been working with her team to kind of downsize, if you will. So I want to be honest with you, we will not be able to keep all of the staff necessarily that we've had for the last few years, but between resignations, the expansions that we have approved for student support services, we will be able to support many of the positions tonight. During your special call meeting, you'll get more details about those positions. Is that what you're asking, Ms. Roberson? I'm not sure.
But it is, and I guess my concern, and we can talk about it later.
Mhm.
But what I want to make sure is this is side by side, this is a substantial decrease. And when I look at school renewal plans, I see folks are counting on those positions. So I just want to make sure that it's not in this budget.
So a couple of things are at play. We're backing out of ESSER. We've made expansions to compensate for that. And then we have schools planning for the weighted student funding formula. So whereas some of the positions aren't going to be supported necessarily directly in this expansion, we have heard from particular schools who are requesting to maintain their social worker or their mental health therapist or their psychologist or what have you. And so it'll all come together, I think, for you as we go throughout the day.
Okay.
No, there was a line item, Mrs. Roberson, in the expansion request for learning services that we presented last Tuesday that has been removed here. So the bottom line, the bottom number is decreased because the literacy coaches / interventionists that were in the original presentation in audit and finance have been removed because when we received clarification from the state let us know that there was no requirement to transition the interventionist to certified all in the coming year. And so we were able to back that out of this year's budget. So that explains, I think, the bottom line decrease in the number, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm not looking at the side by side one, but I'll pull it up so that I can help try to point those things out as we go through, because we have made some changes. Yes, ma'am. Thank you for pointing that out. Very quickly on slide 18, you'll see here a breakdown of how the weighted student formula plays out, student group by student group, as far as the pupils that we're trying to serve who are most needy, those that we've identified across our system. Pupils in poverty, the line item amount is almost $21 million, 20,000 pupils in poverty across the system, nearly 21,000, about 6,400 multilingual learners, and about 5,000 students with disabilities. You'll see that equals a $32.8 million ask in regards to the weighted student formula. There were ESSER projects that met the ESSER threshold. We talked a little bit about the cutoff score of 65 at the central office and 70 for schools. And this week, I think I forwarded to you all a comprehensive list of those so that you could review them on your own. We're happy to answer any questions you might have about those. If you go to the next slide, you'll see that we developed a project management framework to implement the WSF moving forward after actually the committee of the whole back in March. After we originally presented this to you, we immediately put together a framework and started working through it with our principals and our central staff. It's our guide to sort of help us manage the whole project. And we're having budget meetings with schools to review how they intend to use their monies. In fact, most of those meetings have now finished. If you go to the next slide, you'll see here something we reviewed at Audit and Finance. I'm not sure what that big mark there is in the middle of that, Maggie, but it looks really strange. It looks really strange. But you'll see on one side, if you can see in board docs, it doesn't show up in board docs. The initiation of the program was forming this project team and establishing our groups, planning around resource management, including our contract review meetings with various stakeholder groups, at the execution of the WSF, which we hope will ensure our success. The performance control here being scoped with the project plan to make sure the guardrails are in place, and we'll review those very, very briefly since you've been exposed to those. And part of that performance control is the establishment of a way to manage and assess the effectiveness of the WSF, both at the school level and as a system. We're working very closely through that now, and then closing out the program after year one and assuming the success of it. Going on to the next slide, you'll see how that breaks down from each phase: initiation, planning, execution, performance control, and closure. Beginning with the background research, which started with a group of principals back prior, quite frankly, in December, prior to the holiday break. Then we drafted and released a funding formula, guidelines, a way to submit and have your projects approved at the school-based level. We have established this core project implementation team and now are conducting the needs assessment and approving all submissions. To the next slide, Maggie, you'll see here our plans we started in March with the training plan, communicating, working through all the financial pieces in Munis, which I know all of you love so much, thinking through our workflow between HR and the finance team, and working on these guardrails. The biggest piece we have left from our perspective is this progress monitoring system, which you'll see A, B, and C one back, Maggie, there you go. Creating the progress monitoring system and the evaluation success metrics. We're working with some partners to help with that. You can rest assured, though, that our success will be measured against student outcomes. Establishing progress evaluation review teams and hosting these metric reviews with principals as needed to ensure that the system as a whole is aligned. We'll define our impact reporting needs as we move forward and approve the budget update reports and keep you, of course, engaged throughout the process. On the next two slides, very quickly, you'll see how you may and may not, for the public that might be viewing now, how WSF may not be used. And many of our stakeholders express concerns that if we didn't have tight guidelines and guidance around this process, that the monies might go to certain things that might not directly impact the student groups to which they're intended. So we develop these guardrails with principal input. WSF may not be used, of course, to pay for capital, maintenance, construction, grounds, more than one administrative personnel position, out-of-state conferences and PD, retreats, faculty travel, faculty rewards, contracts with non-authorized partners, and IT on both devices and software that could be unrelated to student outcomes. When principals want to use software, that has to be vetted through their associate superintendent and the chief academic officer, Mrs. Simmons, and approved by the chief operating officer who manages some of those projects and me. Funds may, conversely, on the next slide, Maggie, be used for Teachers, associate teachers, student help needs, you'll see a list of things there. Follow-up support for chronic truancy, chronic absenteeism, school psychologist, student concern specialist, enrichment, travel for students, extended day, student internships, etc. On to the next slide. You'll see local PD is included here, parenting programs, student uniforms, materials, extra duty, extra pay, academic acceleration programs, whether that be during the summer or extended day. So lots of things the monies can be used for, but also very clear guidelines around how schools may not use them to think about how they're going to staff. You'll see on slide 26, before I turn it back over to Mr. Prentice, that in executive session tonight with you, we will discuss a reduction of approximately $5.5 million worth of services. Mr. Prentice will go a little bit more in depth about the 2.5 now of pulling initiatives that he discussed briefly at Audit and Finance. Mr. Prentice.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. So the rest of our strategic cuts are going to be addressed ideally through some risk pooling initiatives. Determine where we have areas where we've had traditional savings year over year, and looking to establish a pool of sorts that can be administered by the superintendent's office and the CFO to address unanticipated needs that may come up without padding individual budgets throughout different departments in the system, so that we can be responsive and fund things without having to establish funding in all the different divisions that exist unnecessarily. So overall goal of reducing $8 million is coming into focus nicely. And we're just working on that last little piece as we go between now and first reading. So if you go to the next slide. So this is the overall expenditure comparison, looking at the FY 2024 projected year end compared to the FY 25 proposed budget, which includes all of those scenarios that we've just discussed. So the FY 24 projected year end expenditures of $711 million, that is an under expenditure of the total board approved budget. And then net of our revenues that we're anticipating to collect by the end of fiscal 24 would bring us a variance of $25.6 million, a positive variance. When you look at the overall year-end picture, we are estimating to increase fund balance by roughly $29.5 million. So our goal for the FY25 budget is to balance on no more than $29.5 million. And I'll share that in a future slide when we look at the overall long-range plan. But the goal is to balance the budget with no more than the fund balance that we've accrued and a positive variance at the end of this year to create a measure that's sustainable and also recognizes the board approved fund balance policy. So when you look to the FY25 proposed budget of $827 million, of course, as you might expect, the most substantial increase is in salaries and fringe, $72.4 million, which includes categorically all of those things that we've just discussed. As you go down through those categories, one thing to point out, which is a one-time anomaly, is the transfers has increased by $36.6 million. And what that is the implementation of the WSF, moving that from the GOF over to the new WSF fund that was outlined in the technical guidance for creating the WSF. That has to move out of the GOF and over into that fund. The difference in that number and the WSF number is the increases in charter school payments as calculated based on the revenues that we collect and the pro rata allocations that we have to establish to be able to make those transfers and payments to the charter schools.
There's a difference in membership dues.
Yes, ma'am. And their pupil allocations. I actually just got an email about that this morning. So we're starting to, they were done earlier in the spring before I got here, and then we're going to true those up as part of the final budget package to make sure we have those numbers correct based upon the attendance per pupil metrics and everything that are in that policy.
Can I thank you for that? So I'm just doing side by side. Let's go back to a couple of slides, just so you don't have to change the presentation. The hot wash, when are you going to do the hot wash?
So let me
For
go
the
back.
project management framework, the closure talks about the hot wash. And I only asked that because we did the ESSER impact on the back end instead of the front end. And now we're looking at it. So when are we going to start hot washing?
So if you look at the following slides, one of the big things that has to be done before July 31st is to fully define those impact reporting needs. And so the goal would be to have at least 3 full quarters of representative data in fiscal 25 for WSF. to be able to kind of interim evaluate those metrics, and then also to look at the whole year end as, as a process in general. But I think there'll probably be kind of 2 points of concern there to your question. We're definitely going to hot wash the overall implementation process to make sure that we've got a good plan in place going into future years and make sure that the team comes together. We're coming together as soon as Wednesday to have an interim checkpoint, touch point, if you will, with HR and finance on all the things that we've been working on with contract issuance. So there's lots of little interim steps along the way. And then I would imagine at the end of the year, a major hot wash on the overall program and the reporting out to the board of the year-end data.
I have a question. You're using a term that I've never heard. What do you mean by hot wash?
Well, that might have transferred over from my county days. But we always, whenever we would enter an emergency event like a hurricane or something like that, as a term to debrief the overall process, after the event's completely over with, just going over everything that we did right, everything that we did wrong, where we had opportunities for improvement, so that when we convene together as a group to go through that same process again, we could learn from all of our strengths and weaknesses to be able to make it better and better as we continued into the future. So that was a technical term from that process that I think I stuck into the slide. And Mr. Baroe is looking at me like he wants to give a more detailed description. It's a military term. Yeah.
We've learned a lot from Mr. Baroe and Mr. Prentice with all their terms, and their
PMP.
widgets.
I told you to get a ledger.
One question, and thank you for pointing it out, the reduction in membership, what are we bringing out of, removing from that list?
Let me go back over to that slide.
I mean, it's a substantial
So,
amount.
very good question. This memberships and dues, when it rolls up in the system, also includes some subsets of purchase services that are more supply based. And that is a result of the ESSER. If you remember the ESSER procurement issue that came up earlier this fiscal year, where the non-approved ESSER items had to be journaled over into the GOF, that's those amounts. So that's, if you look at that as FY24 projected year end, that year end is coming in substantially over what our normal experience has been. So next year's base budget removes all of those expenditures that are not going to be normal and ordinary.
So 2.6 would have been the budgeted amount for this year, even though it's not the actuals.
Close in line,
Ish.
yes, sir,
Yeah,
yes.
okay, got it. Okay,
Correct.
thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Good question. Just so, and I will, to Ms. Roberson's earlier question, at audit and finance, I had the FY24 budgeted expenditures. I was still going through all of the year-end refinements to put in the year-end projection. So I did update this to show this is an FY24 projected year-end versus just the FY24 budget, as we refined all of those things over the last week. So that has changed just so slightly in that one column. The FY25 proposed budget numbers are the same from the committee. So the variance has changed as a result. To Mr. Kelly, to your point, the budget was in there originally at the audit and finance level, and then we increased it to the actual projected experience. So if we go to the next slide. So just categorically breaking down the expenditure profile in the GOF, salaries and fringe, of course, are the largest piece of the pie at 68.1%. And then again, transfers of 14.3%, including the implementation of the WSF increases that wedge over normal historical experience. And then unique to CCSD with transportation services, custodial services, certain subsets of security being contracted, that falls to the purchase services line item versus the salaries and fringe line, just to show you the overall breakdown of where the dollars are being allocated. Go on to the next slide. So as we requested, we put together a few scenarios to show what the cost and representative millage increase would be in the event there was a desire to go above and beyond what's in the base budget. Right now, $5,000 teacher pay increase and a 99% of market, as I mentioned earlier, for classified staff. So you can see that $7,500 total, which would be $2,500 over the $5,000 that's already in there, would cost just over $12 million, which is representative 3.7 mils. Going full all the way to $10,000, which is double what's currently in the budget, would be an additional $24.1 million or 7.3 mils. So either one of those scenarios for teacher pay, and then for classified staff going to 100% of market would be roughly 3.6 million or 1.1 mil. And I've included some additional slides. I don't know if go ahead and go into those, and then we can take questions after I go through all of the data regarding millage and additional considerations. But I wanted to include for the board just kind of a simplified millage calculator as it pertains to the law and the way that millage is levied. to show, for example, a $300,000 property at the 6% assessment ratio, which is the ratio that's applicable to revenues in the GOF, since 4% are excluded under Act 388, and what the value of 1 mil would do to a property tax bill for that value of property. And generally, just to show that when you hear millage described, it's 1 mil is equal to $1 of revenue for every $1,000 in assessed value. And so for $18,000 of assessed value is an $18 increase in property taxes for every 1 mil levied. And then, of course, just based on the calculation, you can only levy mills to the 10th. You can only go out 1 decimal place in terms of that calculation. So I've always round to the nearest 10th whenever making those calculations on the former slide. Also wanted to show the board a comparison within our region. If you'll go to the next slide, between Charleston, Berkeley, and Dorchester counties, just to give you an idea of where things stand at this current moment with the approved levies. DD2 down at the bottom, Berkeley in the middle, Charleston at the top. Charleston's levy is the lowest in the aggregate, 138.3 mils for operating, 26 for debt, for a total of 164.3. And you'll see on a future slide that we're showing 141.3 for the fiscal 25 levy, which also includes reducing debt down to 23. So it's still an aggregate 164.3 levy. It's just shifting between those two categories. Berkeley coming in at 206.8, and then Dorchester 2, you can't see with the PDF, but they're at 192.8 operating and 65 debt is what that's saying there.
And just for the viewing public who aren't maybe familiar, would you explain why it matters whether that's going against GOF or debt on the mills?
Sure. So the GOF levy is not taxed to 4% owner occupied properties based on Act 388 under state law. So if there is something that's levied on that side, your owner occupied home does not see that on the bill, or it sees it, but then it's credited back out. On the debt side, that's applicable to all real and personal property in the county, no matter the assessment ratio. So you do pay the 26 mils on your owner occupied home. And I don't, it's not to get into the semantics of a tax decrease, but if we did this, it would decrease the overall tax bill for owner occupied parcels only as a result of them going from 26 down to 23 mils, shifting between operating and debt. The total levy for a 6% or greater property or personal property in the case of vehicles remain the same. So not trying to necessarily characterize it that way, but that is the effect that this swap would have on the overall picture for tax bills in Charleston County. You look at the big picture here, and I don't know how well you can see the comparison down there, but we had a conversation in the last week comparing retail structures within Charleston and Dorchester County, for example. So I pulled a grocery store, the Lowe's Foods, not to pick on anybody in particular, but the one on Bees Ferry compared to the one on Dorchester Road in the Oak Brook area of Somerville, the tax bill for the one on Bees Ferry is $136,000 last year, and that's in city limits in the city of Charleston. The one on Dorchester Road in Oak Brook is in the unincorporated area of Somerville, and they paid $383,000. To equalize that, meaning the value of the building's the same, the jurisdiction's the same, only thing that's different is the actual millage levy. Their tax bill would be still roughly double what it is in Charleston County as a result. This is a little bit of extra information, but we pulled earlier the cost of bread and the cost of milk at each store just to see what the circumstance would be. And ironically, the cost of a gallon of milk at the one on Dorchester Road is some 39 cents cheaper than the one in Charleston, even though the tax bill in Charleston is less. You're paying more for the same gallon of milk than you are on the one on Dorchester Road. So not trying to make anything of that. But I think that the retail industry in particular, to make any point, is very much concerned about the demographics of income profiles and everything in the areas that they're located. And the notion of a property tax bill doesn't necessarily directly calculate how they price consumer goods. But I also just wanted to point out the significant disparity in the millage levy for a district that we're geographically adjacent to in terms of Berkeley and Dorchester too. So I'll maybe pass the next 2 slides over to Mr. Brigman, talking about teacher compensation and non-teacher compensation examples. We've provided a few examples based upon the $5,000, $7,500, and $10,000 schedules for comparison.
Sure. Thank you, Daniel. So I know you all have seen comparisons and charts done like this before in the past by my group in HR, but this is basically we're looking at 3 different teachers based on degrees and experience, where the teacher currently is for 2024, and then stepping the teacher, and then also showing if it's a 5,000, 7,500, or $10,000 increase. So that first teacher, bachelor step 0, that's our first year teacher in one of our classrooms today at 48,146. You can see the value of the step at $928. 5,000, again, 7,500 or 10. This teacher is going to step 1 for 2025. And you can see the new salary under the 2025 category at the end on the far right. If you go down another, we have a master's teacher at step 15. The teacher currently makes 69,016. Steps to 16, and you can see the adjustment in salary on the far right. And again, for a bachelor's teacher at a step 25. I'm going to go to the next slide, and this is showing our non-teachers in our in our schools as well as central office. And what I want to say about, especially for anybody who's watching that might be one of our employees in these groups, for the school-based support staff, we do have a task force that's been looking at all of the job descriptions and positions that are school-based. We had pretty much an all-day meeting Friday to go over the data that's been collected and need a little more time, so we're meeting again this week. And so this is totally based on the salary structure itself, where our current employees are on the structure. This does not take into account if there will be any adjustments by reviewing their job descriptions. But first here we have a teacher assistant for 190 days at step 12. Moving to step 13, of course. And the reason you see 2 different salary levels for 2024 and across the system is we have teacher assistants either have the paraprofessional exam or 60 hours of credit, or they actually have a degree. So the degree is paid slightly higher. So you can see if you have a 99% of market, what the adjustment would be, and then 100% of market. So this does take into account that they are 190 days for this annual salary. Of course, these employees are hourly. I did not include the hourly amount on this. Student concern specialists, the same scenario. Again, 99%, 100%. Secretary bookkeeper going from step 14 to 15. A manager in our system moving from step 11 to step 12, and then an officer. So these are, I think Mr. Calhoun requested this at Audit and Finance, maybe Mrs. Roberson, to see what this looks like. Again, we have not finalized the recommendation for school-based support staff, such as teacher assistant, student concern specialist.
Yes, this is Darren Calhoun. Yes, this is what we asked for, and this is particularly what Ms. Stamp was asking for at Audit and Finance, thinking about that 27,000 and that 29,000 moving up for FY25 for a teacher assistant. And she was asking that mainly because of, we want people to be able to have a livable wage within our system. I don't know who about to be able to live off of 29,000. Even if we do this, do the 100% of market the way we are, that is still very low when we're looking at, trying to get everybody who works within our system having a livable wage. So for board members who don't know, the question was, how do we give them a raise to where they can actually fill it? That's where Ms. Stamp really wanted to get down to. How do we give our classified staff a raise to where they can actually fill it, going into their paychecks, as opposed to, the 2,000, and say if the insurance increase or anything pops up like that, that $2,000, that $2,200, they wouldn't fill that at all.
Yes, sir. I don't think I could not hear you earlier. I don't think you directly had a question. It was more of a statement, right? Okay.
No, that was a statement. Thank you.
Yes, sir. I just want to make sure, and that is part, Mr. Calhoun, what the committee is working on, is looking at the level of position. So it could be that a teacher assistant or a student concern specialist would move up a pay grade. So we're going through that process now. That was definitely a big part of the conversation among the group, which has been made up of not just employees in these positions, but principals and other stakeholders have been part of the conversation. And it has been around, how someone lives off a $29,000 or $27,000 salary as well in our system. So I understand. I think that's my last slide.
All right, if we go to the next slide. So this is the first pass of a multi-year forecast that looks at several components of the overall budget picture. A lot of this data feeds from some of the data that you've seen in the past, kind of in numerical form on the slide. But I want to point out several things here. On the left-hand side, the primary axis is your fund balance, and on the right-hand side, the secondary axis is the overall revenue and expenditure budget. So the small red line is your revenues, the black line is your expenditures over the fiscal 24 projected year end through fiscal year 2028 horizon. The shaded red area is your fund balance, and the kind of blue, I don't even know what color that is presenting on the screen, is your fund balance requirement per the policy. So what I wanted to show here is that in fiscal year 2024, we're anticipating that fund balance will grow to roughly $211.9 million. The fund balance requirement, once you strip out the ESSER sustainability funds that were never part of that fund balance requirement and the kind of unspendable component, you're sitting around, 211.9 available and 113.4 required. So kind of as part of the overall budget plan to balance, we're proposing that use of fund balance not in excess of the amount that we accrued at fiscal 24 year end to balance in fiscal year 2025. And so you can see that the revenue and expenditures, there is a gap between revenues and expenditures as those lines kind of diverge in that year. But what I wanted to point out is that strategically, we can use this fund balance that we've accrued, and the policy, of course, increases every year as the 2-year look back 2-month average continues to increase commensurate with the increases to the budget. But as you get out to fiscal year 27 and 28, even though you're getting very close to meeting where your fund balance is compared to what your fund balance requirement is, you can see that the actual variance between revenues and expenditures shrinks considerably. And this entire picture is supported on 141.3 mils over that 4-year horizon without a tax increase, using fund balance as a means to strategically, sustainably balance the budget until we reach a point where our revenues and expenditures very closely align. I will say that, there's further refinement to be done here with this model. And I think a lot of that's going to be through our overall experience in fiscal year 2025, as we continue to true up and make the budget more lean. I'm still trying to be conservative in the overall process of balancing. So I would anticipate that if we budget a use of $30 million of fund balance next year, that we will use some of that fund balance, which is intended. As you remember, this year there was $14 million budgeted and we didn't use any of it. We actually contributed. And so I'm anticipating that we would use some of the fund balance, but maybe not 100% of what's budgeted, which would continue to help that overall process, and the fund balance use each year would be less than what we're showing in this model. So this ideally is kind of a worst case scenario, each year. And what I did for assumptions on the expenditure side is included the $5,000 base scenario that we've just shown you for teacher pay, the 99% of market for non-teachers, and all of the other considerations that you've been provided, as well as the implementation of the WSF. And then in 26 and 27, utilized the rest of those ESSER sustainability funds, included a $35 million increase in funding for compensation next fiscal year. When I say next fiscal year, I mean fiscal year 2026, following fiscal 25, to implement the other half of the teacher pay increases and the 100% of market scenario for non-teachers. And then after that, began to grow all of those scenarios based on a look back on CPI. So the ideal situation would be, once you reach that kind of attainable, sustainable market situation, would be to start growing your compensation more naturally based on the growth in the market, so that it was more of a step and a COLA each year, instead of these major jumps that we've had to make over the last couple of years to try to kind of keep up with the overall market. And then same thing on the transfers to charter schools following the policy based on revenue growth each year. The expenditures growing in line with increases for contracts lining up with historical CPI and historical trends, just to be able to overall try to paint a picture that what we're doing this year can be sustained, and that some of this fund balance that has been accrued by the board's decisions in the past in terms of being able to put some of those dollars away, especially in the face of the ESSER cliff, can be used while still maintaining a healthy fund balance for emergency reserves and for cash flow requirements. So if you go to the next slide, I presented one other opportunity here. This is generally the same model, but this includes a scenario where we go to 145 mils, which would be 3.7 mils over the current aggregate, which is supportive of the $7,500 teacher pay scenario. So it's kind of a middle line, actually provides, an increase over the sum of everything that was provided this year plus the bonuses, and provides a millage increase requirement in fiscal 25, which is sustained over the course of the fiscal 25 through 28 horizon. And really the only notable difference there is if you look at the fund balance, and I have to really zoom in on this in Excel to show it to you. But if you look at the fund balance as you go out to FY 27 and FY 28, and I'll go back to the other slide, you can see oh, sorry, I realize I'm not controlling it on my screen and I have to actually ask for it to be controlled from another screen. You can't see what I'm doing over here. But if you go back and forth between the two, you'll notice that crossover point in fiscal year 27 and fiscal year 28 in terms of fund balance available to fund balance requirement just changes ever so slightly. So we can go ahead and move forward to 35 again.
Can I ask one question, Daniel?
Yes, sir.
And I'm sure I know it not in the slide deck, but I'm sure you've looked at it. What would it look like if we waited to see how the reassessment comes out and didn't do a millage increase until 26?
So that's a good question. So I assumed for reassessment several factors. I looked back to what happened in 2020, and in 2020, you saw a substantial portion of real property in Charleston County capped at the Act 388 15% growth cap, which leads me to believe that the fair market value of properties in Charleston County are substantially higher than the growth cap. And so we'll see again a large portion of the properties in the county capped out in 2025 when reassessment occurs. I looked at real property, so your boats and airplanes and vehicles growing between 1% to 2% in that scenario. And so all in, that shows roughly a 10 to 11% increase in revenue in fiscal 26 based on reassessment being implemented and the levy maintaining the same levy. You absolutely could, you could see a higher increase in real personal property and, a larger portion of your properties cap out at 15%, driving an overall larger increase in assessment that we've assumed. And, 4% increase in assessments would make a sizable difference to this picture. I just didn't want to go any higher than our historical experience to make sure that I wasn't being too, high drive on revenues. But, given the experience in property growth and value growth in Charleston County over the last 5 years, it's not out of the question that reassessment could drive a higher increase in assessments than what this is projected, which would help both the FY 26 budget balancing exercise and the overall fund balance picture in the out years.
Well, and the reason I ask is if we were to go with the $7,500 increase, theoretically, if I'm understanding your math correctly, that could be done without the millage increase in 25. We wait till the reassessments come out. If it comes out, then great. If not, like the millage increase doesn't need to happen in 25 in order to do the $7,500. Those two don't have to be tied together. That's what I'm getting at.
Well,
Is that right?
so reassessment, while it hits in tax year 25, is effective fiscal year 26. So I'm going to give a hybrid of the point you were making. You would need the tax increase to do the 7,500 this year. But if the reassessment values came in substantially higher than what we're forecasting, you could potentially roll back off of it in fiscal 26, and it would only be a 1-year type situation, but you would need it to balance this year.
Why couldn't we pull more out of the fund balance if we're, because I'm looking at a fund balance, it's double what it needs to be. We're working to get $32 million out of it. So if we wanted to do the 75 this year, couldn't we pull more out of fund balance to get us closer to level and then decide on a tax increase? I think you get where I'm coming. I'm trying to avoid a tax increase unnecessarily because it looks like we're increasing taxes and have too much money.
So you could, I mean, that $12 million, you could pull an additional 12 million out of the fund balance in the budget this year, see how the fiscal year 25 experience rolls forward, knowing that, in the event that reassessment came in close to the projected, you would have to increase taxes in fiscal 26. Or to the other point, if it came in substantially higher, you might have used that fund balance, but it would still sustain the future model based upon the current levy if we had a substantially better experience during that process. So
Okay.
that's a fair question. Absolutely.
Yeah,
It's just a,
just to put a fine point on it, I hesitate to support a tax increase so that we don't break the bank 4 years from now. I would, yeah.
I understand the question, and that, trying to look at the overall smoothness of it, I guess, if you will, in terms of having nothing this year, nothing next year and onward. Like if we were going to do something, making it in the current and then rolling back off of it. But again, yeah, you've got enough, you could appropriate more fund balance than we're currently recommending. It would take the fund balance appropriation up to approximately 42 million in fiscal 25 to be able to balance if you did the 7,500 in fiscal 25.
But we have the cash, we have the reserves to do it.
You do. If, the figure, the State Department's policy is 1 month of operating, and our policy is 2 months of operating based on the analysis of the last 2 fiscal years' budgets, and then averaging those out, and then doing that based on, 2 months of that average.
Thank you.
So, yeah. So if you go on to slide 36. So just next steps, while we feel really good about this picture at this point in the process, and, next time we meet is going to be to present first reading of the budget. We do have some refinement to the central office reductions as we continue throughout the process. Those things will be adjusted to the bottom line all prior to first reading. The revenues, of course, are not final. We're still looking at the final collections for this tax year, with the TIF growth, the fee in lieu of tax revenues, and the personal property growth. I mean, right now we've posted February vehicles and personal property, but we still have March, April, May, and June that we need to post. And depending on how those come in, we may be able to adjust that year-end figure up ever so slightly. And I say that because if you recall, with this fiscal year, the 138.3 mil levy was an increase of 8.3 mils over the prior year levy. And the way that vehicles are assessed and taxed, it's a January through June and July through December cycle. So we're just now getting the benefit of the first 6 months of personal property being taxed at that new rate, because the first 6 months prior were taxed at the old rate. And so the heavy revenue coming in from personal property is going to happen between January through June of this year. And then we'll get the full benefit of the 138.3 mils for 12 months in fiscal year 2025. If you go to the next slide. We are looking, and this is by no means a promise or a fully vetted statement at this point in time, but we may have some ESSER dollars after we submit our reallocation to the state that could offset the expenditure for positions that were ESSER approved previously from July 1 through September 30th. So if there's a position that was previously ESSER approved, or a program that was previously ESSER approved that we've budgeted 100% in the GOF in fiscal 25, if we have some savings, we may be able to use those to offset a quarter of the cost of that position in fiscal 25, just to help the GOF out a little bit more, to make sure that we spend every last dollar of ESSER allocation before the September 30th deadline. So we have been working on the reallocation that we talked about in Audit and Finance Committee, to bring that to SDE, so that in the April report, we can present that to the Audit and Finance Committee in May, and the board. And then we're also looking at, just the categorization of those savings to make sure that we're prepared to be able to move forward with that plan, and to be able to use every last dollar. Of particular note, on, I guess it's Wednesday or Thursday of this week, that's the deadline for Friday of this week, requisitions to be entered against ESSER dollars for this fiscal year. So after that cutoff, we should be able to see, where things land with purchase services, because we're really just incurring nominal P card expenditures and salary and benefits expenditures from that point forward. So that'll also help us see where we had encumbrances that had not been expended. When we release those encumbrances, what dollars are available. So we're working on that, and that will only serve to help the budget. And then also between now and the next time we meet, we'll prepare the budget document for first reading. So that's why tonight's meeting is really important, to get the overall temperature of the board in terms of giving us good direction to move forward with a first reading package that we can bring to you largely intact for review and approval when we get to the committee of the whole and ultimately the full board meeting in May, because then we'll move forward with our second reading and public hearing in June. But I'm happy to answer any questions and turn it over to Ms. Huggins to close us out.
Real quick, if we do the reallocations, as you just stated, will we go off the impact reports of who we actually try to give money to?
So think of this as more of an opportunity to make sure that the dollars are expended. So it wouldn't change the overall fiscal year 2025 budget, but by and large, we would probably try to shift those dollars towards approved full-time positions. And then that way we would, guarantee there's an incumbent in that seat and that we know between July 1 and September 30th that their salary and benefits is going to be X, so that we know that whenever we close out, we're going to spend those dollars. I would prefer not to shift those dollars to any further purchase services, because we know based on what we've seen with the WSF so far, that there's more than what we're going to have by way of ESSER savings and personnel that gets budgeted. So we could just try to use those dollars for personnel and make sure that every last dollar is expended.
I agree with that assessment. Thank you, Mr. Prentice. So in the last two slides here, Maggie, we'll just close out how we started this whole budget season when we talked to you that very first workshop about our philosophy. And I really want to thank Mr. Prentice, who's joined the team and just with a brilliant mind, been able to take this vision and put it into action. So Mr. Prentice, again, we want to thank you and your team for the great work you've done. First, allowing growth to pay for growth using the current millage levy, then considering our ability to reallocate amongst the levies based on our debt schedules, use the fund balance for certain expenditures when appropriate, and then when everything else is exhausted, ask you to add additional millage for our work here in Charleston. The last slide here, as Mr. Prentice alluded to, the next committee of the whole on the 7th, or the Audit and Finance on the 7th of May will be the first reading. We'll review that with the Audit and Finance Committee. Our last budget workshop, will be May the 13th. We'll have the first official reading with the board on the 20th, and the public hearing followed by the second reading of the budget on June the 24th. So we're certainly open to questions, comments, concerns, feedback from you as we work collaboratively, as Mr. Prentice alluded to earlier, to put together a solid package to share for the first reading with the Audit and Finance May 7th. Mr. Kelly.
Want to kick us off?
I don't have any more questions. I think I asked all my questions in Audit and Finance. Let me just say thank you for such a detailed report and an excellent budget workshop. This is and I have to say, in all transparency, this is the best budget workshop that I've attended in my 14 months of serving. This is budgeting at its best right here. So I look forward to the first reading. And I also would like to share that I've received positive feedback, emails coming in from district employees saying that they watch the Audit and Finance Committee meeting and that they really appreciated the conversations they followed. It was thorough. So let's continue in this direction moving forward. So thank you for this. I have no further questions.
Dr. Demple?
Thank you so much for the presentation. It has been very clear and I really appreciate that. I just feel I want to reiterate my commitment that I want to see us have our employees have livable wages, and that the maximum that we can allocate for them, that's what I'd like to see. Thank you.
I just want to ditto everything that my colleagues have said so far, and also say, I just want to say on behalf of everybody that's spoken to me about the budget process, thank you for expediting and getting things to us early rather than later. And also very much grateful for years projected rather than just looking at the ground right in front of us. So thank you.
Yeah, I commend you. I think offline, I'm going to want to sit down and talk to you more about the transfer question.
Yes, sir. Other than that, I think it's great.
Mr. Calhoun, any additional?
I have nothing additional. Thank you.
Sir? Ms. Bailey?
I just want to say that I too sat in on YouTube and watched the audit and finance meeting, and I am so excited about your attention to detail and your excellence in all of you putting this budget together. So thank you very much.
So well done again, ×9. One specific question is, of course, tax increases, just the term, even if it were 1 penny, makes people go like this. But if we were to consider the $7,500 increase for teachers, the 99% market for the other employees, we would, for a balanced budget this year, we would need the 3.8 millage increase, but we would not need a millage increase in the next 2 years for sustainability. That's my question.
So that is a correct statement, that you could balance the budget with the, if our goal is to appropriate no more than $30 million in fund balance, then yes, you would need the millage increase this year. To Mr. Kelly's point, you could appropriate more fund balance, and you may have to balance that off on future growth and, increase millage in a future year, no more than the 3.7 mils that we were proposing for the $7,500 scenario.
Thank you.
There's a couple ways to look at it.
Yeah, and the point I was getting at was that inside that same window of dollars, we could accomplish both and then see if the growth comes back favorably for us. A potential. Anyway, sir, phenomenal. Ms. Huggins, thank you to the whole team for all the work. I have nothing further other than you all did it. Wonderful work, and this is a wonderful breath of fresh air. So thank you.
Thank you all again. The kudos goes to the greater team, and certainly Mr. Prentice for his leadership, Mr. Brigman around the teacher compensation task force, classified pay, the work he's done. Mr. Brewer and Ms. Simmons on the academics and capital side. So we appreciate it's a team effort, that's for sure. So that's all we have for this budget workshop, Mr. Kelly.
Okay. Well, wow. We advertised 5:30, didn't we, for the public, for the CALB start?
15.
5:15.
5:15.
Miss Denny. The
So
5:30.
5:15. Oh, 5:30.
It's
5:30. I hate to disenfranchise anyone who's driving in to join us for the committee of the whole. So I suggest that we,
Question.
sure.
Could we call to order the meeting of the whole, change the agenda and have part of this executive session and then come back out at 5:30?
Oh, good call.
We would be happy to do that.
I'm totally open to
Maybe
that.
legally do that.
Oh, absolutely. Any objection? Did everybody understand the suggestion? Any objection to that?
No.
Mr. Calhoun, did you catch the suggestion? Okay, you're on mute, sir, if you're talking.
If we call it to get order early, is that a violation?
Not if we do it in.
Not if we
public.
change the agenda.
Okay. All right, well then we shall move on to item 2, formal call to order. Do I hear a motion, Ms. McKinney, about the adoption of the agenda?
Yes, I would like for us to amend the agenda to begin with executive session, ending executive session to come back out at open session at 5:25.
Second.
Well, yeah, standby one. I don't see an executive session here.
Oh, well, all right, so let's rethink this.
You can't do it.
Yes, I'm sorry. I was just trying to say that we don't have an executive session. We have a special call meeting. So we cannot move
Oh, yeah.
the meeting forward.
But the chair can call a special meeting whenever, if It is the chair's ability for a special called meeting.
That's correct. Could we not go into the special called meeting now?
Correct. Correct.
Yes, yes, sir. That's what we would recommend,
Right,
calling to
because
order
that-
the special call,
That is the
going
prerogative
into
of the
executive
chair.
session, then adjourning that meeting, starting the committee of the whole. Then you would have to call the special called meeting back to order to take action on the 250 list that is required to be discussed at the committee of the whole.
I have a question.
Sure.
So we've already called
Well-
the committee of the whole
No,
No.
to order.
No,
No,
We,
that-
we,
yeah.
we did, and there's an easy solution to this, though. If someone will make, or I move that we
I
I
move
move that
we
we
adjourn.
reset, not adjourn, recess.
Sure.
I move that we recess committee of the whole until the conclusion of the special called meeting.
I second it.
Any objections?
No.
Right. Pardon, sir?
Do we have, the parliamentarian there for that one? Because I don't know if that would be in order.
Mr. Johnson, would you think it's in order to adjourn,
No.
Not
to
adjourn,
stand in recess, a committee meeting until a special called meeting?
To recess it, yes, not adjourn.
Okay, committee of the whole stands in recess. Well, hold on.
Board of Trustees special call to meeting. Do I have a second?
Second. Wait, you're calling it to order. You don't want a
Yes,
second.
it's all in favor. First thing up on the agenda is the adoption of the agenda.
So move.
Second.
All in favor, any objections? The agenda is approved as written. We'll move on to item 2, which is to convene into executive session. I'd like to propose a motion to move into executive session.
So moved. Second.
Any objections?
No.
We are now in executive